Welcome back to our ongoing coverage of Budget 2012. Well, in a moment we'll go through some of the fine detail for you once again, but already over the last half hour we've seen the political battle lines shaping up over this budget. Joe Hockey just telling us that the opposition will be backing most of the family payments that are detailed in tonight's budget. The increase in family tax benefit A of up to $600 a child annually, and also the one-off, or not the one-off, but the new supplementary allowance of $210. It will be an ongoing payment that's to come in from next year. They'll support that too, but not the school kids bonus. This is the other key element of the handouts to families. This is going to be a payment of $410 per primary school student, $820 per high school student. The opposition believes that's just a sugar hit to compensate for the carbon tax, and they're not inclined to support it. So, if the government's to get this through Parliament this week, which is what it hopes to do, it's going to rely on the support of the Independents and the Greens. Joining me now, Greens Leader Senator Christine Milne. Thanks for your time. Let me start on this particular issue. Will you back the school kids bonus?
Well, I want to have a look at the whole budget, because you look here at the payments. From the Greens' point of view, we're really pleased the government didn't proceed with the tax cuts for big business, because we wanted a more equitable outcome. We would have liked to have seen that money invested more systemically, for example, on the most vulnerable Australians, particularly those on New Start. You're talking about 512,000 people who are living below the poverty line. So when you look at this whole quantum of assistance, the Treasurer said it was to help the most in need, and we're saying they didn't start with the most vulnerable. So when you look across you have to look at those education bonuses in that context of the broad picture of how people are being helped. Having said that, it's actually money that those people were already entitled to but hadn't actually claimed. And there were, I think, 1.3 million families entitled to that education rebate, but more than 1 million of them didn't actually take it up. And the ones who did were the better off ones, because they had tax accountants who knew to claim it, but a lot of people didn't. So what this does is actually provide people with some help, but across the budget there are people who haven't got anything much. $4 a week for New Start is not enough.
Well, I want to get to that, but it sounds, therefore, as though you're positively inclined towards this measure. If it's money that they were entitled to get anyway, you think they still should?
Well, it was bad policy the way it was designed, and it has failed in delivering that assistance to families for education.
And is this a better design?
This is a better design, but the question is, in the context of all this money going to various recipients, what about the New Start people? So I want to look at the whole budget in terms of how we help people, but I'm particularly distressed that we haven't got systemic change. It would have been much better to give a weekly increase to New Start of a level of $50 a week, rather than looking, where you might get perhaps more positive
Could this
outcomes.
be a bargaining chip for you to demand more for the New Start allowance?
Well, we'll be talking to the government about the budget in general terms, but the other area, of course, we're very disappointed about is the failure to fund the Gonski review into education. They've been putting off and putting off and putting off investment in education, and there's nothing. There's no new money for education, and there's doubling, in fact, of the fees for maths and science in universities, and that money will be coming straight out of the pockets of university students. So I'm not very happy about that, I have to say.
What do you think about the government's commitment on school funding? Because it did make a pretty big deal about the Gonski review, which recommended at least $5 billion more was needed.
That's right, and that's one of the reasons why the Greens said let's not proceed with the big tax cuts for big business. Why not just put this money into the systemic change we need? And Gonski, clearly $5 billion into schools would have made a very big difference. So you're talking about an amount of money per school child, but wouldn't the nation have benefited more by $5 billion going into education funding across the board? They're the sort of questions. I mean, we're happy to see the change for National Disability Insurance. Very pleased we had the foundation of the Denticare that we had in negotiation with the government. The Greens have been able to deliver that. We're pleased to see the beginning of aged care reform. All these things are systems, whereas just one-off cash payments or a bonus now and a bonus somewhere else doesn't help someone living on so little as New Start.
Well, this is the centrepiece of the budget, really, these bonuses, these increased payments to families. Are you going to support those particular increases, family benefits and this new supplementary allowance that's going to be paid out? Will you back all of that?
Well, we've guaranteed the government supply, so there's no question about that, although I have to say I am concerned about the loss of some 3,000 public service jobs, but nevertheless we have an agreement to support supply. But every other measure will have to come through as part of legislation in the coming months, and we want to look about how we can do that in the fairest possible way and help the most vulnerable to actually be able to make their way in the community.
Let me ask you about the foreign aid budget. This is being... Well, the promised increase is being pushed back. It means almost $3 billion won't go to foreign aid that otherwise would have as a result of tonight's decision. What do you think of that?
I think it's terrible. It's a broken promise. We had part of an international agreement. Australia is out there in the international community having committed to 0.5 gross national income by 2015. Much was made in the budget speech about being the Asian century, where we're positioned in relation to Asia. 18 of our closest neighbours are developing countries, and they're going to look very dimly on this. And the pitch for Australia to get onto the UN Security Council has been Australia does as Australia says. Well, now we've just shown people that we don't. Actually, we're prepared to breach those. And what's more, the Greens were prepared to back getting rid of the fuel tax credits for the big miners, which would have given them $2 billion right there and then, which they could have used to meet their international obligations. So we're prepared to be responsible and stump up the cash to do the right thing, and I'm disappointed the government hasn't. Having said that, where is Joe Hockey going to get the money from in order to honour all these payments in the event that a coalition government was to take power? Because they're full on about saying they'll support all these things, but they're not prepared to say where they'd get the money.
So just finally, Christine Milne, the Greens, when you do sit down with the government to look at what you're going to support and not support, it sounds like, by and large, you're okay with the family payments, but you do still want to see some New Start money there.
We want to see the people who are most in need helped first. I think that's fair enough in terms of first principles, and everybody agrees that 512,000 people living below the poverty line is not a fair go in Australia.
Greens Leader Christine Milne, thank you.
Thank you.